right, everyone, welcome. We're going to get started here. So I have the pleasure of introducing Kelsey and Aaron. They are both cybersecurity engineers for the Guthrie Clinic. Today this talk is going to be about HomeLab, so I'm going to read a little bit about what they're going to tell you about today, and then I'm going to let them do all the talking. So there are hundreds of blogs on how to build a HomeLab, but rarely is there a talk on how to use it to upskill your career. This session was hosted by two cybersecurity engineers by day and homelabbers by night. Probably the first time I read that, but that's pretty cool. So this will showcase some tried and true methods of pushing your HomeLab, regardless of the size, to its maximum potential. As a group, we will explore different use cases for any budget on topics such as simulated corporate environments, large-scale virtualized networks, and detection engineering labs to help give you experiences and learning opportunities that are not easily available otherwise. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey and Aaron. Let's welcome them.
Thank you, everyone. So like you were saying, Aaron and I were talking one day and we're like, let's go to BSides. And we're like, let's not just go, let's have a little bit more fun than just going to attend, right? So we were brainstorming ideas, and one of them that came up is a lot of people here have home labs. So just by show of hand, who here has a home lab or has ever had a home lab? Exactly. So keep your hands up if you've got a home lab. Now, how many of you have said, okay, now what do I do? Right? So it's one of those where, we were talking with helping Aaron with his home lab, that there's plenty of ways and reasons and methods to get the home lab built, but hey, you've got it. Cool. That's awesome. What am I going to do with this? Oh, God. So that's kind of where this talk came from. So quick little background. I'm Kelsey Seymour. I'm the Senior Cybersecurity Engineer at the Guthrie Clinic. Been in IT in one way or another for a little bit under a decade, and cybersecurity for about 5 years now. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron.
So I'm Aaron Everson. I'm also a cybersecurity engineer at Guthrie, not senior. I've got about 20 years of experience in infrastructure, endpoints, and networking. I'm very, very new to cybersecurity, minted as of March. So one of the things that I did is, and what started a lot of this conversation is Kelsey's been coaching me a lot related to my home lab, which is basically what most PC enthusiasts or infrastructure guys would have, is a few disorganized PCs laying around to test one thing or another. So as we started putting the lab together, again, so many articles about, okay, what to build, how you can build it, but then what? So this kind of the talk was really inspired by Kelsey helping me do the same thing.
So with that, we kind of broke this into 3 different sections, as you heard earlier. First one's going to be around simulated corporate environments. And we're just going to highlight some tools here. These are not by any way endorsements. These are ones we've used, so there's a little bit of endorsement there. But at the end of the day, it's really, you have the lab, now what? So with that, one of the nice things you can do is you can play around with agents and logging methods. So I'm going to pick on EDRs a little bit. So EDRs are very expensive, very hard to get for a home lab unless you roll your own like E5 tenant with Microsoft, get Defender, and then now you're just paying a lot of money for something that it's only for a couple endpoints. So really, EDRs kind of get broken into 3 main different areas. So one of which is endpoint visibility, right? So there's a open source tool called OS Query, which basically exposes your endpoints, whether they be servers or laptops, desktops, whether they be Mac, Windows, or Linux, and it makes it a queryable SQL table. So I can reach out to my environment and say, hey, amongst all of my virtualized servers or whatever's in my lab, who has BitLocker enabled, and are they to what encryption level? And that's just a simple SQL query. I can pull that data, similar to how like CrowdStrike might display it within their tool. Velociraptor kind of takes in that active response side. So a lot of the EDR tools now have ways to do active response. Velociraptor can definitely assist with that. So with Velociraptor, you can run PowerShell scripts, you can push scripts, stuff like that. And the third one I'm going to talk about here is Sysmon. So one of the nice benefits of most EDR products is you get some really fine-grained, in-depth telemetry. So does Sysmon. You have to play around with your config file, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But nonetheless, here's 3 tools that get me everything but the actual quote-unquote protection side of an EDR that we might want to play with from a cybersecurity standpoint for a total cost of 0 outside of hosting it in your own lab. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron for Active Directory sides.
So, in most environments, most of us, Active Directory is already set up before we get there. We never have time to play with an implementation. And we never have time to play with certain configurations or misconfigurations. So think about how many times you look at your environment and go, man, I don't think it's set up right. Never get a chance to either change that configuration because, how many times do you tear down Active Directory and build it again? You just don't do it. So being able to test and your configurations and redesign your configurations in a microcosm in your home lab is great experience. Get to test new things as well as GPO deployments, seeing how they act, how they react, or don't act properly, whether they've been deprecated or so forth, but also having a firm understanding of this from the infrastructure of it, tying that into then cybersecurity only makes us better analysts, better engineers for understanding how that works. Because at the end of the day, as probably going to say multiple times, cybersecurity is simply infrastructure excellence.
For sure.
So,
and another thing here with GPOs is, how many of you, if you're helping recommend GPOs or even implementing them, have you done this before, right? So using labs is a good way, as Aaron was saying earlier today, and I'll let you say the famous quote here.
It's what did I say? Sorry.
It was an early morning car ride, people.
Right. It's been a long day. It is a low risk confidence boost. It is, you can
Absolutely.
do things that would break your corporate environment, and
please break it.
Please.
In this case.
And then you know exactly how it's going to behave. On top of that, if you know exactly how something's going to behave, because I've been in that seat as somebody on the infrastructure side going, no, cybersecurity, I'm not flipping that switch. It's a lot easier to have that discussion, have that argument, and win it in a reasonable sense when you want to change a control or a GPO.
For sure. For example, on GPOs, if you're not used to working with GPOs, if you have a GPO that sets some bad settings, simply disabling that GPO does not mean those settings get flipped back on the endpoint. And if you don't play around with it in some way, shape, or form, whether that's in a dev environment at work or in your own home lab, is the little gotchas like that aren't often that well documented, and that's where that confidence boost can really come in play.
Absolutely.
Another thing around Active Directory for sure is attacking and defense, being that AD is one of the largest IAM solutions in use by most companies, from medium business all the way up to large-scale enterprise. Understanding how it can work at its heart can be really, really beneficial. For example, why should we fear the print operators group? And if you're not used to playing around in Active Directory, especially in more of a default state, these insecure defaults, and learning not only just how are they bad, and maybe being on the red team side and seeing exactly how they're bad, but also from the defense side of, okay, how can we help mitigate this? How can we allow the business to still function and, only have one or two break glass DA accounts? And then also another fun one with Active Directory I've had a lot of fun and success both professionally and personally with is LDAP Firewall and RPC Firewall. So these are some open source DLLs and solutions that were produced by a startup called Zero Networks. They fully open sourced this part of their solution. And what it does is it does DLL patching to allow you to get very granular on your LDAP calls and your RPC calls to different servers. So I'll pick on the attacking defense side here is DC syncs. So being able to completely sync a domain controller to an attacker-owned computer. So you need either a domain admin or a domain controller account to do that. Makes sense. Windows out of the box has no functionality on blocking that for IP addresses. So if you have a valid domain admin account and you can talk to the domain controller on the ports required for a domain controller to function, guess what? You now have a copy of the domain controller. So one thing that we can do with playing around with these more in-depth firewalls would be start setting up IP ranges. So, hey, here's where my domain controllers live. So now I have the barrier of entry of having to have a DA or DC machine account and be on a domain controller already to even attempt to sync. Plus, with the logging included with this, if someone attempts and they're not on a domain controller, that's a very easy, high-fidelity red flag for your security operations team to pick up and run with. Because now we went from, hey, a DC sync happened that kind of looks suspicious, we should go investigate, we can now say this account from this source IP address attempted this and failed. So we have a blocking control, we have a really good detective mechanism around it with high fidelity, and that one little event log is everything your SOC needs to go to start their investigation. But it's a mildly complex thing to introduce to an environment, so if you don't have a dev environment or you want to play around with it in a lab, that's where that confidence boost can really come in play, because any of these tools implemented incorrectly can also break Active Directory, which no one wants to be responsible for bringing down domain services for your company.
Hence, HomeLab.
Yes. So the next subtopic here we want to touch point on is infrastructure as code and other engineering. So with infrastructure as code, rapid deployment seems to be the name of the game now, right? So companies used to be, hey, if you're a software company, we are going to release once every 6 months. Now it's, hey, can we release once a day, once a week, 5 times a day, 10 times a day? So infrastructure as code is really beneficial in that, and that's how the infrastructure teams will actually start trying to build that. So what does a database server need to look like here? And using whether it's Docker Compose, Vagrant, pick your flavor of choice, that's something that is becoming really prevalent in our organization. So why not do that for your home lab? So for example, my home lab at the point it's standing right now at my house is actually powered off right now. I don't need a lot of it. I have 1 or 2 small fanless units that I keep powered on, but the 6-8U of rack I have sitting in my closet is powered off right now. If I need to go do something, I'll power it on, and then I have different little scripts that I can just execute against my lab and my hypervisors to build what I need. So if I need Active Directory, it's as easy as hitting the power button, grabbing a cup of coffee, hitting deploy. And now, especially if I'm going to break things, I can have a very quick, easy reset button that only takes 5 minutes. So being able to have these, repeatable things, and also considering this is the intro set group as well, cloud security is a huge button on most resumes nowadays as far as, job description, stuff like that. Infrastructure as code is huge, especially in cloud native organizations. So this is a really cool way to up level that I actually don't hear too much being talked about, especially on the lab space outside of, hey, let's go play with this in a cloud provider. But if you happen to run the previously free before Broadcom version of ESXi in your home lab, you can still do deployments that way. So up next, I'll toss it back to Aaron for operating system hardening.
So, OS hardening. I mean, there's a certain amount of that you can do in your own environments from whatever company you work for, etc. But if you don't have access to it, especially if you're just starting out in your career, it's great to do in a home lab. So, I mean, you could just wake up one day, choose violence, and turn on every CIS. I'm terrible with acronyms, so apologize. You can just turn on. Yeah.
Take a drink.
Yep.
So with the CIS benchmarks there, right?
Yes.
So you have your level 1, your level 2. Level 1 is, hey, this is reasonably secure, it's unlikely to break things. Level 2 is, here be dragons, proceed with caution.
Mm-hmm. So. And then it gets worse. So you obviously don't want to turn that on in your environment. You obviously want to have a solid understanding of CIS baselines, Microsoft security baselines, and any other firewall changes, Windows firewall or otherwise, that you want to implement or play around with. You want to have a solid understanding of what the impact is going to be on the environment, especially if you want to stand toe-to-toe with a desktop engineering manager, I know because I was one, and say, hey, we want to turn this control on. You want to be able to say, well, this is what this control is going to do. This is exactly how it's going to behave in your environment. I know because I've done it, and it's a much easier sell than saying, hey, Aaron, go turn on this control on all your endpoints. I don't know what it's going to do, but the book says we want it. So that's being able to do that in your home lab. Again, low cost confidence boost, low cost knowledge boost.
And picking back onto rapid deployment as well. Hey, so I'm turning on these controls, turning them off. How am I doing that? Can I do that in a script? Can I do that via GPO? So not only are you just gaining the skills yourself, seeing how things can interact, how things change, you're also going, hey, wait a minute, I kind of got this figured out. I can do this in 10, 15 minutes. Here's a GPO file even. Or here's a PowerShell script I just need to run on these endpoints. Hey, it's been tested. So again, it's really the best part of a home lab is it can give you that confidence, it can give you that knowledge, it can give you things for your resume that you might not already be able to put on there, and do so with confidence. So another thing that's fun to do with labs as well is canaries. So if you were in the Please Waste My Time talk earlier today by Q, that was definitely a topic that got brought up 1, 2, 3 times. And again, great minds think alike. Phinxt is a great place to get started. So they have a lot of, kind of pre-canned almost, with either webhooks or emails for canaries. So you can do PDF documents, Word documents, AWS credentials, stuff like that. It's a free open source thing. They also do have commercial appliances that are awesome for corporate environments if your company wants to go that way. Don't know if it's still the case, but I remember back at my old shop, they used to boast on their website that we have had 0 unsatisfied customers. And that's a pretty bold claim to make, but I think they made it quite safely. Now, again, this wouldn't be a talk about home labs if we didn't mention rolling your own canaries. So there's also a really good book, Intrusion Detection Honeypots, Detection Through Deception. It's about $20 on Amazon. I read it about every 2 years or so, it seems, and I just finished my read here last week, so it's kind of fresh in the brain, but it goes through what is a honeypot, and then gives you ways to build them yourself using a Ubuntu VM or Debian VM and a desktop. So guess what? Pretty well within the realm of most home labs. And that's something that you can take back to your organization, put on your resume, whatever have you. Hey, deception technology, deception controls, when used effectively, can be very, very effective in your environment. Or HTTPS interception. Do you want to roll your own squid proxy or whatever have you? Do man in the middle of your SSL? Figure out why pinned certs are both a blessing and a curse on stuff like that? And play around with all that? Guess what? You've got a lab. Go do it. Have fun. Really, at the end of the day, the sky's the limit. So this concludes our first little third, and we're running right on target here. Does anyone have any questions thus far? Go for it.
Not a question, but I'll just reinforce your statements here, because I do a lot of interviews of candidates, and I get senior candidates that I ask them, how would you harden an operating system? Linux to be, the backbone of the internet. And I kid you not, 90% of senior level engineers, security engineers, kind of change the root password.
Make sure firewall's on, I guess.
Oh, no.
Oh, not even that. Okay.
And,
oh, no.
And they want to scan the server to find open ports. I said, but I gave you the server. Why are you scanning it from outside? And so this is so critically important. Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce because it's a great point that you guys made. So.
That's it. Understanding how to do that in microcosm is so wonderful because, again, like I said before, and I'll say it again, I'll keep saying it probably till I retire, and then afterwards, cybersecurity is nothing more than IT excellence, and having those hardening standards and understanding how they're going to work is critical.
Absolutely. And Aaron, how many times did I come to you when you were still on desktop engineering with these harebrained ideas and said, hey, I've had an idea, let's try this?
And how many times did I tell you, get out of my office?
Not many. Not enough that we're both standing here.
That's true.
So with that, we're going to go on to our next little third here, which will be with simulated networking. So the two main tools of the trade here are EVE-NG or GNS3. Both are open source. So with that, we're going to start off with general networking.
So again, if you're just starting out, if you never managed a network, never architected a network, never been a network engineer, again, low cost, low risk knowledge gain, confidence gain. Grab yourself a couple of old switches off eBay, or virtualized, as Kelsey said. Mind licensing if you grab something off eBay, depending on what you're getting. And build it. Go through, build something from scratch. My home lab at the house, I'm actually setting it up as if it was an enterprise environment, right from scratch. network segmentation, zone segmentation, thanks to Palo. It's a good time. But knowing the basics and knowing how it works, again, it's the difference between, hey, network, we want you to do this, versus, and, well, because I said so, other than, no, this is exactly how. This closes this vector, this is this problem, this is how it's going to shrink our threat surface. Beware, and also, different vendors. Does an Extreme switch work like a Cisco switch? Show of hands. Now, so having exposure in microcosm to different vendor hardware, different vendor software, knowing that they operate completely differently. Mm-hmm. You're not going to put settings on a Cisco or a Fortinet that you would on a Palo. You're not going to do, that's getting more into firewalls, but you're not going to program a Extreme switch like you would a Cisco switch. They'd be different. Toss back over to Kelsey.
Sure. And just another thing to add on there. So you might need a non-public email address. So what I mean by that is not a Gmail, not a Hotmail, stuff like that, but university emails tend to work pretty well. But most networking vendors will give you 30-day free trials of VMs. So if you want to go play around with Palo, you can go sign up for a 30-day trial. If you want to go play around with a Juniper VMX router, same thing. Same thing for Fortinet. I believe Cisco is still the same way. Stuff like that. So there's legitimate ways you can get enterprise-grade gear in your home lab, at least temporarily now and then, and actually get hands-on. So not only can you just say, hey, if you're new to the industry, well, I came from a Cisco shop, I've only touched Cisco, I've only touched ASAs, I've only touched Firepowers, I've only touched, Catalyst switching or Nexus. You can say, hey, I went to Extreme, and Extreme, for example, actually has their VM series completely open for labbers, with no license limitations, no anything else. So if you want to say, hey, I want to play around with Extreme Fabric Connect, for example, you can go build that in your lab, build out Fabric, play around with the different routing protocols, play around with different Fabric topologies. And the cost to you, because you already have your lab, because it's have lab, now what, is $0. And that's some valuable things, especially if you pair them with the cheap entry level like JNCIA for Juniper or the Extreme Fabric Connect Associate from Extreme, stuff like that. That's a really good way to help up-level yourself for under $100, because it's just the cost of the exam at that point, and you have hands-on experience. And the other thing here, as Aaron was kind of alluding to, is how does a VLAN work? How does IPsec work? 802.1x authentication. These are all things that, from a networking standpoint, you might not touch much of. But as a security professional, you might have to advise a lot on. So, as we've said before, it's a completely different story when we can say there, hey, we understand segmentation into different VLANs if you have a flat network can be a pain. Let's help. Let's work together. We're not doing this to you. We're doing this with you. And stuff like that. And Aaron, coming from desktop engineering and end-user computing for 20 years, how's your networking skills going lately?
Well, it's kind of, you let the network team deal with that. So you just kind of let them deal with it. And they get rusty, really fast. One of the best ways to avoid rust? Polishing. Low cost, low risk polishing? HomeLab.
Yep. So with that, we're going to transition over into firewall management on the networking side here. So with that...
So, as I alluded to earlier, I'm setting up my own home lab just like an enterprise network. Therefore, I can test different things. I actually have a Palo in my home lab, and being able to test different IPS, different app ID signatures, different rules, how they're going to behave, so that when I get to an implementation or a major rule change, not only can I test it beforehand and see how it's going to work, because unless your organization has a dev environment for their firewalls, which, show of hands, anybody? Exactly.
Right? Well, I'll even caveat that, right? Who here has a dev environment set up similar to your production environment? It's not just a firewall, couple switches, and a couple, maybe 1-2 servers and 1-2 endpoints.
Doesn't happen. So there's a high risk if you've never done the change or the rule change that you're planning on doing. You might read it on paper, you might have seen it done, you might pair with a vendor that's done it, but nothing changes or can replace that. I have done it, even if it's in microcosm. You've done it. That low cost, low risk confidence boost of having done this in the lab yourself and are confident that you know exactly how that change is going to behave. Same thing with upgrades. How many have sat there in the wee hours during an off hours upgrade going, God, I hope this works like the manual said it would? Anybody? Just me? just kind of, oh.
You hit the button and you're like, okay, wait, it's been 30 seconds. Wait, okay.
It said it would only take 5 minutes. It's been 7. Oh shit. Or yes.
Do you recommend simulations like packet tracers?
Yeah. So Packet Tracer from Cisco is a good example. I mean, it's Cisco specific, but it's a very good way of simulating a Cisco environment. You can get the routers, the switches, ASAs, firepowers, I believe, are now in Packet Tracer. It's been a little bit since I've touched it, but yeah, I mean, and that's kind of one of the things we were saying a little bit earlier and alluding to is when it comes to the home labbing is there's 101 tools to do what you need to do. This is the playground where you can go try Milwaukee, go try DeWalt, stuff like that. See what works well, see what doesn't work. So, I mean, it's all in, all different paths to the same end.
So, where are we at?
Yeah. So, up next is going to be with firewall cutovers. So, firewall cutovers are probably one of the hardest things to do within the realm of network security, right? So, whether you're doing greenfield, which actually is the easiest of the hard options here, right? You have nothing, let's build. But, okay, who here has, going back to the AD discussion, how many places do you come that you actually get to greenfield a firewall deployment? Versus, hey, it's here, it's built, it's already here, I'm just the groundskeeper maintaining it. Or vendor A to vendor B migrations, right? So, hey, X vendor raised their prices, 45%. We need to go look at, Y vendor. So, okay, we did a POV, we did everything else. Hey, it's looking like we're going to cut over. If you might not have the budget for professional services or this is something you want to do on your own regardless of reason, practice it out in a home lab. Most firewall vendors will give you a 30-day eval. Build out a small little thing, couple simulated rules, couple simulated policies. Work on that migration. Some vendors have tools, some don't, but regardless, you can now simulate those migrations. And with the rest of your home lab behind it, what's to say you can't build out a quick app server with Nginx, a quick database with insert database flavor of choice, and just test it out. See how it works. Play with it. Have fun and get that confidence boost. And then also segmentation projects. So one of the more frequent buzzwords that may or may not be dying off here, I'm still trying to figure out, would be things like zero trust network access or microsegmentation or anything around that. So cool. What does that mean? How does that work, right? So are you going to play around with Windows firewall rules? Are you going to put a bunch of VM series firewalls or container series firewalls here, there, and everywhere? Again, you have a lab. It doesn't have to be full enterprise scale. You just have to have enough to do those unit tests. And with that, we're going to go on to our next chapter here, which is going to be detection engineering. So again, some sample words you'll probably hear throughout the couple next slides are going to be things like atomic red team, security onion, and different SIMs. So on the detection engineering side, atomic red team. I'm going to start here. It's a really cool thing. It's a really awesome thing to level up your resume. And sure enough, I had it on mine when I actually applied at the Guthrie Clinic many a year ago. So atomic red team is a set of tests that allow you to do basically unit tests around different detections around different tactics to develop detections and test your controls. So it's all mapped to the MITRE framework. So for example, if you look at a tactic for exfiltration of data via FTP, they have different ways of testing it. It's all written, I believe, in YAML, if I remember off the top of my head correctly, or some other markup language. But nonetheless, there's different tools that you can use to ingest the data. Say, I'm going to test out this MITRE tactic. Okay, well, I need 7-zip, so let me go download 7-zip and install it. here's a unit test. I'm going to now encrypt a bunch of data into an encrypted zip file on my disk. So that's just one little mini part of the MITRE attack framework, maybe one little part of something a bad actor in an environment might do. Well, by that happening, that generates logs. Those logs can be used to develop detections, or if you're building out controls, hey, do my controls work as they're supposed to, right? So one of the common things that I always tend to preach on is, cool, we put in a bunch of new detection rules, we put in a bunch of new controls, that's awesome, that's great, I love it. Did we test them? No. Why? So this is a really awesome way to do that. So the other half of the thing is developing tests yourself. There's nothing stating you can't go build one of these. And that's how I got it on my resume when I applied to Guthrie a couple years ago. How can I upskill my resume? How can I upskill my career and stuff like that? So Atomic Red Team maintains a list of here's missing tests that we have. These are test cases we have no listed things on, so let's build one, right? So do some research. MITRE, for every TTP they have, has a bunch of research links already on their website. Go take a night, sit down on the recliner, maybe by a campfire, whatever reading destination of choice is for you, and just start going through the articles. How do attackers use this? How does this look like? And then, okay, let's build it. And at the end of the day, building is just typically one or two one-liners in PowerShell. That's it. What do I need to get to prereqs? So do I need anything like 7-zip on the machine? How does it actually do the test? And then how do I clean up the test to bring it back the endpoint to a set state? So those are really easy, really cool things you can do, and throw it in the home lab, right? Give it a test, see what it looks like. And also, as a somewhat shameless plug, your first commit to Atomic Red Team, they will mail you your choice of a shirt or hat, if I remember correctly. So who doesn't love some good free swag with that? Nonetheless, tying right into the Atomic Red Team, though, is other logging tools, like what we were talking about earlier. Sysmon can generate a lot of data very, very, very quickly if you have a log everything configuration file. And a couple chuckles means, yes, we've all done it before, and we won't talk about that much more. But nonetheless, okay, hey, what does this look like? How does tuning it work? Stuff like that. That's one cool way you can do it, and make sure it gets vacuumed up for those detection developments. Also, audit configurations to pick on Aaron and GPOs. Hey, I want to turn on process logging at the start and end of every process with no restrictions on every endpoint. There goes your CPU, your disk, and your RAM, and everything else. But hey, you got a lot of logs, and your SIM cost went through the roof. It's a win-win, right? So being able to play around and test those configurations in a somewhat of a environment like this, it's a really good thing. I remember the first time I was playing in Splunk one day, and I'm like, why don't we just log everything? Had it in the lab, hit run. That's why we don't log everything. Great. Okay, there's my ingest for a week. So, which brings us to our next topic here around SIM engineering. So, different SIM toolings. So, Security Onion's a big one. They're out in the lobby. It's basically roll your own SIM. They also do case management, packet capture, stuff like that. It's a all-in-one Swiss Army toolbox. If you aren't running this in your home lab, I highly suggest you give it at least a try. Whether you keep it or not, it's up to you, but it's a very quick way to get to zero to hero with this. And additionally, it's fun. It's a really well-built tool. It has a lot of features and functionality, and they're constantly adding to it. Or if you want to go the other routes, Elk, OpenSearch, Graylog, Splunk, you name it. I'm not sure if it's still the case because it's been a year or two, but Splunk pre-Cisco would actually give you trial VMs and stuff like that, so you could roll your own Splunk for limited time, limited data ingest. So that used to be the big player in the space, and you could 100% throw it in a home lab. They encouraged it. Another one is Cribble. Cribble's one of the ones I keep hearing more and more, and it's a fun tool to play with. So it allows you to ingest all the things, pull all the data, and then move all the data. So Cribble, in of its heart, their free tier is, I believe, 1 terabyte a day, which is a very generous free tier. It accepts a bunch of different inputs. Raw syslog, syslog over TLS. You can even use other forwarders like FileBeats, LogBeats, Splunk Universal Forwarders you can tie into it. Cribble also can tie into external data sources. So do you want it to go pull from an S3 bucket? Do you want it to go pull API calls, stuff like that? It can do that on a set schedule. It'll come in, it allows you to manipulate the data, normalize the data, remove unnecessary fields, help save your SIM costs. It's basically a SIM person Swiss Army knife, and with a 1 terabyte a day, free tier, it's a really good thing to play around with. It also helps with things like SIM migration. So hey, maybe you're a smaller shop using Security Onion and you're taking a look at Greylog. How do you do that migration? Cribble's one of those little Swiss Army knives that can help you do it really, really quickly, or even maintain both SIMs in parallel without having to install extra agents or do much in the way of configuration. So it's a really cool thing to play around in your home lab. Highly recommend. And that kind of comes to also the architecture data flow question, right? How does the data flow? What does syslog actually work under the hood like? How do you modify? How do you do regex? How do you do data normalization? And again, especially if you're a Splunk shop, Sentinel, you name it, whatever, these are very expensive tools that most enterprises are kind of like, hey, no touchy, We want to make sure we're being very deliberate here. Here's your chance to get those skills. Most SIMs have some sort of certification track. So from the intro sec, level up kind of side, again, go spin up a Splunk instance and go get your Splunk certified administrator. Why not? And then also implementation plans. So again, whether you're greenfield or going from one vendor to another, what does this look like? How does, configuration management work for these agents? Are we going to use GPO or are we going to use a vendor-specific tool? Stuff like that. Really, this is the chance for you as a home labber. You can have your cake and eat it too, right? And with that, we're going to also talk about source, security orchestration, automation, and response. So this is also one of those next things, right? So if you look at a maturity model of your SOC, you start off by, okay, hey, we're getting logs. We've got detections. We've got a team doing actions. We've got a team doing responses. We're building our own detections, and this is kind of that pinnacle everyone wants to get to, right? SOAR does not mean I'm firing people from my SOC. It does not mean I don't need a large of a SOC. This is how can I make my SOC be the best they can be, right? So whether that's things like webhooks and API calls to pull in and do data enrichment. So hey, I've seen this IOC. Let me go reroute and do some scripts. Maybe I'm going to go, if I see an alert coming from one of my endpoints for something I was playing with Atomic Red Team, I'm going to go use OS query to reach out to the endpoint and pull a bunch of data and put that into my case management system that Security Onion's managing for me. Hey, that's all open source stuff we talked about in the lab that we've built throughout this talk, right? So this is where you can really start tying it together and seeing that full big picture. Corrective controls, right? That's another one. So hey, analysts came in, they had the case, it was fully enriched, you had all the data you need. Oh gosh, now what? It would be really awesome if you just had a single button that said like network containment. Again, with the API calls webhooks, reach out through Velociraptor, quarantine that endpoint from your network. Or hey, kill this process ID, whatever have you. This is where everything we've talked up to this point, or reach out into your virtual firewall and block this IP address. This is where you can start doing all that integration, that tying together, that bigger picture that we've talked about here last 30 minutes or so. With that, we're going to close it up here, and remember, not just happy labbing, but happy doing. Those are both of our LinkedIn contact infos there, so if anyone wants to reach out to us after the talk, we're more than willing, and with that, we'll open it up to questions. Comments, concerns, interpretive dances, you name it, we'll take it.
I'm not going to do the dancing, don't worry.
That's for you guys. Go for it.
So I'm not sure what the group is here for like home labbing and stuff like that. It seems like there could be a whole plethora of home labbing. I'm not sure if people are looking for recommendations on say a bare metal hypervisor, setting that stuff up, or
yeah.
Where would you guys recommend starting with things like
for sure. And that's kind of where this talk born from, right? Because both Aaron and I have our own home labs. We've kind of had them. They kind of sit idle. Like I said, mine sits turned off most of the time because I've got day jobs and a life, right? But nonetheless, things like basic connectivity, right? So you're going to want to have a network built around it so they can communicate. You're going to want to have probably a hypervisor of some sort, whether you're using Hyper-V, VMware ESXi, Nutanix, I think, is one's out there, Proxmox, QEMU on just, like a Linux bare metal kind of thing. Some sort of hypervisor, some sort of virtualizer, so that as you go through the rest of this, you can spin up, tear down, stuff like that. You're not, okay, I'm done with the server, let me go grab the flash drive. Where'd that flash drive go? Let me go re-image it. It allows you to be that kind of change around on a whim, play around with it. Does that kind of answer your question?
Like, because I'm kind of like at that point, you know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
got the hypervisor spun up, got the Ubuntu server, stuff like that. But kind of at the point of like, what now kind of?
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to look for ideas on,
Yeah, spin up Security Onion. Yeah, spin up Security Onion, enroll some endpoints with some agents, and start playing around with that data.
VM, or is that more of a program?
Yeah, so Security Onion's I believe they have both VM and install scripts. They're one of the sponsors here and out in the lobby. They will happily get you hooked up with all the links and everything else you need. But it's effectively a sock in a box. So you got a little bit of everything right there at your fingertips really quick. Yes, sir.
Do you recommend anything lighter weight than Security Onion?
Yeah, so for sure, Security Onion does take a little bit of resources to run because it does do a lot. So that's where we'd start saying, okay, hey, maturity model-wise, let's start splitting out. So maybe you want to run an ELT stack for the SIM portion, use something like Archime for the packet capture and PCAP analysis, and just kind of split it off. So maybe you don't need that full Security Onion suite. You just want to play around with a SIM tool. So go spin up Graylog or Splunk or stuff like that. So that's where I'd say start diversifying. Yes?
Try Wazoo.
Wazoo is fun.
W-A-Z-U-H.
Yep.
It actually comes in
Security Onion.
Security Onion, but it is a standalone as well, and it's open source, so it's a great tool. And the only other thing I wanted to say, you guys probably have these beautiful 19-inch racks.
Absolutely not. It sits on a desk at the edge of my office.
Good.
That's why it's also powered off, because I don't want to listen to that during the work meetings.
Yes, because my home lab, those 3M sticky strips
Yep,
that you
yep.
can get? I put them on the backs of little nucks and things like that, and I stick them in a coat closet, and then when I'm done with certain ones, I can take them down and reuse them for other things. Your labs don't have to heat your home in the winter time.
They should, but it's a very inefficient way. Your
Mine
power-
does.
I knew one of them did.
Yeah.
I'm an infrastructure guy. It's going to happen. My rack is large.
Yeah. So whereas I've been taking the opposite stance of I've been transferring more things onto NUCs and other fanless devices, so he's got a lot of my old 19-inch equipment as well. Another good resource that's always fun to pick on is if you go to IKEA, there's these LAC tables that happen to be exactly 19-inch posts apart. Do with that information what you may.
Wait, which one?
The LAC. The LAC tables from IKEA.
Okay.
Yep, so if you go to Google and type in LAC rack IKEA, you'll get a whole subreddit of people modifying these. It's great.
Yeah.
I was about to say, what?
So,
To piggyback on the questions about the different software and whatnot, I won't say there's no wrong answers when it comes to the home lab, but there's very few wrong answers, because even if you install something and set something up in your home lab and go, oh, this is garbage.
Tear down.
They're down.
Yeah.
It's getting that experience is worth the garbage.
We got one
Yes, sir.
in the back.
Yeah,
Actually, first,
so
sorry.
If you do the labs or playing around, how would you say the best way to present these accomplishments on your resume?
For sure. Absolutely. And that's a great question, because that's one of the ones where, right? So I think the best answer I can give you is it depends. And that's the worst answer I can also give you. Ways I've done it in the past is things like, if I can get something tangible out of it, that tends to be a little bit easier to put on a resume. For example, if you spin up a Juniper VMX and you go play with that and you get your JNCIA, Juniper, I think it's $85. Hey, I spent $85 and now I have a certificate. So that's one way you can abstract away. Or talk about that in like a skills and experience section would be another possible method for that as well.
I have a suggestion actually for that. One of the tools that I was using, or I still use, is hunter.co.
Yep.
It's another platform where you can import jobs. What it actually does, it highlights some of the key points within the job description. So if you open that up in one tab and in the other tab have your resume, now you can see, okay, have I done this before? Then you put that in your resume. it kind of
Yep.
visualizes it for you.
For sure.
Especially, you know, what the gentleman was saying, if you've done it in a lab before, you have your handouts ready for it.
Or just put a home lab section on your resume.
Yeah, if you have room on your resume for that, absolutely.
And software you use and
Yeah.
what you've accomplished in a lab.
For sure, and like as I help review resumes and stuff like that, that is something that does catch my eye, and I am biased towards it, to be honest with you. I don't know how that's shared throughout the industry, but hey, that shows to me you've taken time out of your own day to go and try and better yourself, and that reflects positively in my opinion, and I think a lot of others as well.
From an IT management perspective, I would have to agree. As before I became a cybersecurity engineer, I was a manager for desktop engineering. And that's one of the things I look for is what do you do in your spare time? Are you a hobbyist? Are you a homelabber? What are you doing to better yourself, to explore, are you still curious and are you still hungry? What are you doing? And that's always the standard question I would ask when I was interviewing and something I would look for on resumes. I've never seen it on a resume, to be honest with you. But if it was there, it would have stood out to me.
Yeah. Or, you know, when I help with interviews and stuff like that, one way I kind of phrase the question a little bit differently is, hey, cybersecurity is an ever-changing environment. How do you stay current? And I've had people in interviews go, oh, I've got a home lab, I play with this, and this, and I'm sitting here going, I love this. So,
That's one example.
sometimes you just have to wait till you get in the interview, but it's definitely, I've yet to see it be a detriment anywhere. Yes?
Just to add, I believe VM Workstation Pro is
Yes.
free now.
Yes.
Yep, so VM Workstation Pro and Fusion, I think it's called, for the Mac series. Both of those, Broadcom kind of switched it around, so ESXi is, I believe they got rid of the ESXi free tier, but they did make Workstation and stuff like that.
We also have Oracle.
Oracle, VirtualBox, that's another good one there. QEMU, if you're running Linux platforms. Bunch of tools, bunch of options. Anything else? Alrighty, thank you everyone.
Thank you guys.